Notable caches. Your first ever, according to the Hendon mob, was 2006. The Fall Poker Tour, 17th in a place called Pendleton. You had a few caches there.
Yeah, Pendleton, Oregon is sort of like was the closest tournament series that we had to our local casino. So I lived in Coeur d'Alene, well, technically, I guess, Post Falls, and we would drive across the border to Washington State and play at Northern Quest Casino. And we made a lot of friends playing cash games there, and they always went to these like pilgrimages down to Pendleton, Oregon to play the tournament series there. And yeah, I started going and playing those with Dylan and some of the people we met in the cash games. And that was really my first exposure to like big tournaments. It wasn't big or anything. I mean, I think they had like a $500 main or something like that, but it was much bigger than what the local daily tournaments offered at the casinos back in Spokane, Washington. So it was pretty fun. And I met my old poker mentor, this guy named Dan Largent there. And, when I remember we used to go down and drink whiskey, and one trip I slept in a tent. It was a teepee, actually. We squatted in a teepee because I was so busto I couldn't even afford a room. So I dragged in some lawn furniture from the pool and slept in a lounger from the pool. So, but those were fun times. Like I learned a lot about live poker from him, and he had a lot of stories of playing way back in the 70s in Reno and stuff. So I got a little bit of history about poker and started to really appreciate the game a lot more from those tournament series. So, but that was before I started traveling internationally. So.
Yeah. We have here your first ever notable EPT cash was 2008 in Barcelona, 47 for just under €15,000. Now, prior to this, am I right in saying that you put all your stuff into a storage container and just thought, fuck it, I'm going over to Europe and I'm going to do something myself?
Yeah, well, I split up with that girlfriend I was dating in college, and I really wanted to devote myself more to poker. She was pretty supportive, but like, people are still pretty apprehensive at this point in my career about whether or not I can do it. And when we split up, I took it as an opportunity to really just rally around poker and devote my time to it fully. So I rented a place in Idaho with Dylan, and then this kid that we had met from playing $22 180 mans named Carter Gill, who's quite infamous these days. So he was one of the first people we met in poker that kind of opened our eyes to the bigger circuit and stuff like that. So we started living with each other in 2007 and 2008. And then we had a prop bet. We were all planning on going to Las Vegas that year to play the World Series, and we were going to finish our lease and go down there. And we had a prop bet, who can win the most money in a month leading up to us moving out and playing the World Series. And I was pretty busto at that point in time. Like, Dylan had a backer, and I contacted the backer and was trying to get backed by him, and he declined my action. And I kind of, took offense to it. And then I went a little crazy with my bankroll management. I was very aggressive. I was basically like putting my account all in like almost every single day. But in April 2008, I won like 100,000 in profit from like mid-stakes MTTs. Like, I won $55 tournament for like 15K. And then the same day, the next $55 tournament, like the nightly one they had on Stars, I won that for 15K. And then I started kind of rolling up the stakes, and it kept going well. And eventually I cleared like 100,000 in profit, which for me at that point in time was just like massive, and put all my things in storage, and then went to Vegas. And then I kept thinking I was going to go back and get my things out of storage someday, but it never happened.
Never happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you devoted yourself basically to the European tour from 2008 onwards. A 10-year Poker Stars career, as it were. Other tournaments, obviously, but you said yourself, EPTs, UK IPTs, all this sort of little affiliate tournaments that came with that.
Yeah.
You were, of course, you won EPT Berlin in 2010 to a place as a brilliant stomping ground for yourself for €1 million. Now, this is infamous because it was the EPT that was robbed in the Spielbank Casino, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was at the Grand Hyatt across the street from the Spielbank Berlin. They had some sort of issues with actually running the tournament in Spielbank Berlin, so they used the Grand Hyatt Convention Center to run the tournament, and then they were registering people cash in the convention center. So and the security wasn't so good. So I guess one of the guys that was playing it realized that the security wasn't very good and came up with the idea to rob the registration desk the day of the high roller tournament, which also happened to be the penultimate day of the European Poker Tour. So we were about 20 people left in the main event. This is, of course, €1 million to the win, guaranteed. It was I think 940 runners for a 5K buy-in. And I was chip leader. We're on the TV table, and all of a sudden we start hearing screams and a commotion from the entrance to the convention center. And we hear somebody scream, oh, they have a bomb or something like that. And there's a stampede of people coming from the convention center all the way back out towards the service entrance, where all the wait staff were bringing our drinks and such. And the stampede, in fact, collapsed the TV stage I was on. There's pretty famous YouTube video of the stage collapsing in the middle of a hand. Like, we had hands in progress, you know? Like, one of the outside tables, they were all in, and the turn card was dealt, and the river hadn't been dealt yet. And everybody started screaming and running. And like, luckily the dealer, Fred, one of the best dealers in the world, he put a chip on the deck to make sure that it was protected. And we evacuated the room, and we really had no idea what was going on. I mean, for me, I'm American, so if I hear a commotion like that, I just think somebody has a gun, you know? So some of the Russian guys were giving me grief about it later, because, I mean, I got up from the table and I got low to the ground, and I just like hugged the wall until we figured out what was going on. And then, you know, I'm a pretty big guy, so when the stampede was happening, I just kind of held my ground and made sure people weren't rushing, and went out the service exit. And then when we got out there, man, there was like police cars and ambulances and fire engines and people just crying in the street. I mean, it was wild. Like, we had no idea what was going on. And I bumped into an American kid on the street that hadn't even met before, but he just came up to me and he's like, hey, I'm friends with so-and-so. Like, do you mind if we get out of here? And I'm like, yeah, let's get to my hotel room. So I just took this random American kid to my hotel room, tried to find out updates about what's going on with the tournament. And then we found out that it had indeed been robbed, that thankfully nobody was hurt. And we were asked to come back and play that night, which I think is wild. And I was pretty vocal about my disagreement with that. We had to come back and play 5 hours later, finish the day out. And I mean, it was pretty obvious that everybody was rattled. Like, imagine you're working as a bank teller and the bank gets robbed, right? And then all of a sudden, you're being told that you have to come back and finish your shift. I mean, I just don't really think that would happen in like any other industry. I certainly understand why they did it. I mean, they have like you know, a schedule they have to hold on to. They have the convention center rented for only so many days. They don't want the tournament canceled. They don't want it disrupted. That's certainly understandable. So when we came back to reconvene the tournament, there was a mess of a situation to deal with. I mean, we had stacks on one table just knocked over and just completely spread around the table. So we had to figure out how to reconstruct the stacks. Like I said before, we had an all-in progress. So they came back, and this Finnish kid was all in against who eventually got runner-up to me, Alari Takakalio, super stand-up guy. He was all in and losing. He had ace-10 versus ace-queen, and they were just waiting to deal the river card. And they came back, and they're like, listen, this is an unprecedented situation. We don't really know how to handle this. So what we're going to do is we're going to cancel the hand, unless both of you agree that it's okay to just deal this river card with the deck with the tip on it, you know? And I mean, that's a tough situation to be in, because like the turn of that, I mean, that hand is worth a lot of money for that kid and for the Italian guy at that point. But he did the right thing, and he said they both agreed to run the hand. So he doubled the guy up, and he eventually went on to make the Finnish kid went on to make the final table. The Italian guy, I don't think, did so well after that. But yeah, it was just really strange situation. I mean, it's kind of something the poker industry, I think, swept under the rug a little bit. I mean, it's just such a massive international story at the time. Like, after I won the tournament, which in a big empty room, you know, with no other tournaments going on, and like a skeleton TV crew, I was asked to go on a CBS morning show, which I did from a studio in Berlin. I was on BBC. I was on CNN. So I did the whole like media circuit to do interviews for it and try to represent the poker community as best as I could. I mean, at the time I was pretty, in the media, I wasn't saying like, oh, I was critical of them restarting the tournament, but like privately, like I was pretty critical of them restarting the tournament. I think it really affected some of the players at the table, but it worked out pretty well for me. I won, so
yeah. I mean, I was going to say, because a lot of people say that if these things didn't happen, maybe you wouldn't have won it. If this didn't happen, like the ripple effect, if that doesn't happen, Kevin doesn't win it. But it did happen, so this happens. You never know what could have been. But
yeah, I mean, I had chip lead at the point when the robbery happened, and actually I was kind of spewing chips a little bit, like the maybe 10 hands before the robbery. I'd lost a couple pots to a very good player, Stefan Huber, who is still around. And, when we came back and finally resumed the tournament, I was very vocal at the table. I was like, this is ridiculous. I cannot believe we're playing. I seemed quite visibly angry. Mm-hmm. And I just kept winning every pot, And I had one guy, Jude Ainsworth, who 4-bet shoved against me when I 3-bet him. He 4-bet shoved like 18 big blinds, like 6-5 suited. And like, I have a hard time imagining. I mean, he's such a good player and somebody I really respect a lot. I have a hard time thinking that the robbery didn't affect his decision making to that extent. Plus, I just seemed pissed, So like, I don't know, maybe he just thought I was messing around. But yeah, it was certainly an unprecedented situation. And I mean, here it was, this flagship tournament. I think that maybe the tournament aired like one time as far as the television broadcast happened, and then it was probably never aired again. So yeah, I don't think really many people saw me play. Or knew how I played at that point in time. And of course, my poor parents, they were waking up at 3, 4 a.m. to watch the tournament on a live stream. And then they just see all the commotion and then it just cut to black. Like they must have been so freaked out about what the hell is going on, but yeah, it was certainly a very strange tournament. And it wasn't the end of my stories in Berlin, which is a city that rarely hosts poker tournaments. I mean, it's very rare that they actually have one there, and my success rate has been really high. So,
yes, as I said, it's a good stomping ground, as it were, for you. Now, I mean, I'm looking at the prizes here. Obviously, there was $1 million guaranteed for first, as you said. When you went free-handed, I've got here, third place was €350,000, second 600, first was $1 million. Now, this money is obviously massive. You said you had all your action. Did the pay jumps play into your mind, or did you just play your game and try to distance yourself from the money?
Well, maybe they weren't so transparent about everything back then. I know that in the newer PokerStars tournaments, that they're very transparent about the deals that are made.
Okay.
But back then, I think they didn't really want that to be public, but we did make a deal. Sure. We made a deal free-handed. I respected the opponents I was playing against enough to realize the gravity of the situation, that it was probably in all of our best interests to make a deal. So the 3 players that were left were myself, Ilari Takakalio, who is Flaba Haba online. He was a high-stakes PLO player. And in fact, he's the only other person I'd ever been heads up against in the tournament. I had lost to him in a 1K PLO no-limit hold and split tournament in London. The only other time I had ever been heads up in a poker tournament was against the same kid that I beat heads up in the EPT. So that's just like a wild coincidence, in my opinion. And then the third player, Mark Inazon, was a really well-respected French cash game player, mid-stakes cash game player, very much like a French Jason Mercier, where he had that sort of cash game pedigree. Very dangerous opponent. And, I just didn't really want to risk anything playing against these 2 guys that I respected a lot. So I thought it was in our best interest to just make a deal and chop it up. I think Mark was pretty happy with that too. He knew that if he got a big score, like it would probably lock him up a sponsorship deal, which I think eventually he got a Winamax sponsorship deal out of the score. And we made a deal free-handed, and then we had to leave money in the middle to play for. So the difference between second and third wasn't very big. Obviously, after we make the deal, there's no difference. Sure. So it was really just winner take all after that point, which I like, because there's you play with all these ICM pressures, and certainly as to my advantage as the chip leader, but the chips were getting a little tighter as we got three-handed, and just being able to play for chip EV and lock up a lot of money and just play for the title seemed super attractive. So out of respect for my opponents and respect for the money in the bankroll, I decided to make a deal.
So yeah, well, brilliant. And then you fast forward to another significant year, 2014, EPT London. You came second for £308,000. Now, The reason you were in the United Kingdom, a lot of people may or may not know, is you have Scottish heritage.
Correct.
Unfortunately, that year your grandfather had passed away, and you made the pilgrimage with one of your brothers to Scotland
That's right.
to spread his ashes after getting this sort of go-ahead from your grandmother. Is that correct?
Yeah, so my grandfather had passed away, I believe, a year or two beforehand, and my brother and I had requested to hold some of his ashes with the idea of going out to Scotland, to the place where the MacPhee clan hails from, which my grandma and my grandfather had been to before. And then the name of the place is called Colonsay. It's a small island off the coast of the Northern Highlands. So we had to take the train from Glasgow all the way up to Oban, and then take a ferry there to this tiny island. And yeah, it was a really interesting experience because there was a lot of emotional baggage. You know, my grandparents were very close to me. They were my next door neighbors growing up my entire life on the lake. I mean, my grandmother was like a second mother to me, and my grandfather was just a giant 6'5" gentle giant that was just quiet and stoic, and really just, I mean, he didn't say so much with his words, but by his example, you know, and he was a huge impact on me and my brothers growing up. And my grandparents, in fact, had been married for 70 years.
Wow.
70 years. So as a surprise for their 70th wedding anniversary, and this was shortly before my grandfather passed away, my brother learned how to play the bagpipes in secret. So when their 70th wedding 70th anniversary celebration came around, my brother showed up in full-on MacPhee tartan and everything, and played the bagpipes for them, and they were just blown away. I mean, yeah, it was super cool. And my grandfather, he'd always really held on to his Scottish heritage. I mean, obviously we have the MacPhee name, but when we were growing up, we'd have family gatherings. He'd put on bagpiping music, and the name of our sailboat when we were younger was called Colonsay, which is, of course, where the MacPhee clan hails from. So, and it's a place that my parents had been to, my aunts and uncles had been to, and something that in our family we were very tied to. And I had just never been. In all of my travels, I've never been up to Colonsay. I mean, they didn't have poker tournaments there, so why would I have gone? You know, so. So it was a very interesting experience, you know, holding on to his ashes through international flights and bringing them out to, we did actually a whole tour of Scotland. We went up to like Inverness and Aberdeen and Glasgow and Edinburgh, and eventually up to Oban. And it was just super emotionally exhausting. Honestly, like, I didn't think it would be that big a deal, but we were drinking a lot. We were in Scotland, so we were drinking a lot of scotch and drinking a lot of beers. And it, like, by the end of the trip, I was like pretty fucking emotionally spent, honestly. So by the time I took the train from Oban all the way to London.
Yeah.
And then played the European Poker Tour there. And I was already beat by the time I showed up, you know, like it was a very exhausting trip. And I stayed with Stephen Chidwick and his now wife, Maureen, who was his girlfriend back then, and competed in the European Poker Tour there. And that's actually probably one of the tournaments, it's probably the tournament that I'm most proud of, because I never got smashed over the face with a bunch of cards. I mean, obviously I had some good hands here and there, but I just fought and fought and fought. And yeah, it was just really gratifying to get a heads up, you know, and I outlasted a lot of big names, a lot of friends that over the years that were deep in the tournament were getting a lot more attention than me. And it had always been my goal to win 2 European Poker Tours. I mean, that was a big deal back then. Nobody had done it before Vicky Corn eventually took down her second. So that was obviously like a big goal for anybody that had already won one. You wanted to be the first 2-time winner. So this was my chance, and unfortunately I got heads up against a very talented Sebastian Pauly. This was actually one broadcast that was actually televised that I was on, the 2010 EPT. That barely was broadcast at all. And eventually when I shipped some other tournaments later on, those weren't even broadcast. So this was really the first time people got to see how I played, and it was a very fun final table. I mean, like, Jake Cody was on the final table, and Art Corin and a bunch of just really talented poker players. So it was a really super tough lineup. But I got heads up against Sebastian Pauli, and he just held over me. I mean, like, he always had a better hand when I had like a good hand. I'd have ace jack, he'd have ace queen, you know. And he's a very talented player. And I honestly probably should have done a deal with him heads up. We talked about doing a deal 3-handed. I know people in the broadcast, people were kind of critical of the way I handled the deal negotiations. He wanted a bit more than ICM 3-handed, and I said no. And then when we got heads up, he wanted to chop again. And my backer, I had strict instructions from my backer back then to absolutely not chop with him if we got heads up, especially after we declined the deal 3-handed. So some people might think I was like a little rude to him in that broadcast, saying that I just wanted to play heads up. But honestly, like, I kind of just wanted to win it without alleviating the pressure of the situation. I wanted the pressure. I wanted to show that I could just win it, no deal.
Yes.
Be the first 2-time EPT champion. But I didn't win. I got second. But it was, as far as like effort I'd been putting into poker tournaments, like, I put my heart and soul into that one, and that's definitely the result I'm most proud of.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a brilliant effort, so close to being the first ever 2-time EPT champion. And you said not a lot of people know kind of how you played in that. Just slightly before that, there is obviously the hand that is one of the most famous hands poker stars have notoriously put up against Vanessa Selbst. The pocket fours versus ace-9 off.
Yep, that's a pretty famous hand.
Are you allowed to? Are you wanting to break this down, Kev? Because, I mean, I've got here, there was an open, there was a 3-bet, there was a 4-bet, there was a 5-bet, there was a 6-bet shove, then there was a tank call. Now, was there any history here? Did you have any tells?
We had massive history. I mean, Vanessa and I were very good friends for a long time. We had traveled to tournaments together and stayed together, and we had played many events together because we'd gone to the same tournaments. And you know, there's a lot of hand histories that led up to that. But Vanessa is obviously one of those people that you need to expand your value ranges to be able to defeat her. Otherwise you're going to get chewed up and spit out, you know. And obviously looking back on this hand, it's quite cringe, you know. It's quite cringeworthy to watch this hand. Poker was played a lot different back then. There was a lot of click back wars. I mean, my initial sizings were terrible. I probably should only 5-bet shove, but I sort of had the feeling like she was going to punt it off to me. The previous stop in EPT Madrid, in a very similar hand, she a 6-bet shoved against Nick Schweedy, who was the grand final champion one year, Nicholas Schweedy, the Lebanese guy, with Jack-9 offsuit. There's the hand histories with her on the big game where she's, you know, 6-bet called it off with Jack-7 suited against Prahlad Freeman. NAPT, when she won in North America, she 6-bet shoved Ep4 suited into aces. So I just knew that she was like notoriously loose in these spots. You know, my plan was actually to call it off. In retrospect, it's a pretty terrible plan. I should have just shoved in the first place.
Yeah.
But, you know, my read on her is that you could just see the steam coming out of her ears. Like, honestly, like, there was a couple pots leading up to that before we got moved to the feature table where she looked like she was tilting monkey balls, you know, like she didn't seem like she was in a great emotional state at that point in time, and she was getting super frustrated. We had a very tough table. I mean, we had Anton Vig and Pascal Hartman and like
Andrew Chen was to your right as well.
Who was that?
Andrew Chen, I think his name.
Oh, yeah, Andrew Chen, of course, the legend himself, who got heads up in Berlin, I believe, that year. I believe he got heads up against David Ekatai. But yeah, it was just one of those spots where, like, I honestly thought, you know, like for her, yeah, first of all, like, her statements about the hand are pretty ludicrous, and she was fairly out of line with her reaction to it. You know, he's always coming after me. And it's like, well, you 6-bet shoved against me, and the highest card in your hand was a 4. So how was I coming after you? If anything, it's you coming after me.
Yeah.
And ace-9 is a perfectly reasonable hand to 3-bet. I have a blocker. It doesn't play very well when I flat. I mean, I could certainly flat it.
And you're on the button.
I was on the button, right? So it just seemed like, oh, this is like the top of what would normally be my folding range. So it seems like a fine hand to incorporate as a 3-bet. And then once she 4-bets, it's like, well, I know she's a very capable 4-better. So, I mean, I can 5-bet and, you know, run the risk of her 6-bet shoving in my face, which ultimately you know, I might just have to call it off here because she could have ace-4 suited, she could have ace-5 suited, and she just really doesn't have the credibility to be 6-bet shoving with the high card in her hand being a 4. I mean, she has no blockers. She's completely in the dark. She's just completely making a read on the situation that she was 100% wrong about. You know, she thought, you know, I mean, her initial reaction, I think, was like, do you have ace-jack?
Ace-jack.
You know, and like, yeah, and it's like she was in the right ballpark because I had like a hand that was like value E, you know, not really, but value-ish enough that I could clip some of her 6-bet shoves. If she showed up with like Jack-9 offsuit, like Nick Schmiede hand, or 8-4 suited, like she did in NAPT, or Jack-7 suited. I mean, it's just, how do you range somebody that's doing those kind of plays, you know? And obviously my line is an exploitation. It's not game theory optimal. And in retrospect, obviously I wish it was just 5-bet shoved, but you know, we're playing some hood poker here. We're taking it to the streets. We're not playing GTO versus GTO. We're playing exploitive versus exploitive. And sometimes some crazy stuff happens when you have those two sort of strategies mashed up against each other. But like the fallout from this hand was very real. Like I lost a friend over this hand. Really? And yeah, I mean, I was, you know, a lot of friendships I had at the time, they got a little tense because Vanessa was really not happy about it, very much so. So yeah, it's obviously the hand I'm most popular for. I don't think it's very representative of how I play most of the time. There was only one other time in all of my online poker career where I had done a similar play with ace-8 offsuit, and I was completely right. The guy had like queen-9. So I feel like my reading ability was strong there. It's just like my underlying game theory wasn't obviously the best. I should have just ripped it in her face and not put myself in a position. But if you think about it this way, ace-4 and ace-5 suited are much better hands to do her line with than it is pocket fours. At least she has a blocker, you know? And in my mind, I'm just like, man, she's going to show up like ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited here. And like, I'm just like, man, I'm getting such a good price. And like, she has so much random stuff in her range from all of the history, from all those hands that you mentioned before, that it just seemed like folding would just be kind of a disaster. And I wasn't playing for pay jumps at that point in time. I wanted to win. It was the first time I'd been back in that room since the robbery. Yeah. I mean, how epic would it have been if I'd won the second European poker tour by like 6-bet calling Vanessa Selbst and being stone cold right about it. I mean, I still was kind of right. You know, I had enough equity to call it off, obviously, with 2 overcards to underpair and a bunch of dead money in the pot. But yeah, I just wanted to win the tournament. So I made a play that I was trying to win the tournament. And I think my read on her was right. And obviously, you know, I wish I had just shoved in her face to prevent her from doing that. But it worked out. I hit my ace on the flop. I think I hit trip aces or something like that.
Ace on the river as well.
Yeah. So she was pretty livid. But I mean, I don't think she can, you know, put too much blame on me for that play. I mean, like, you 6-bet shoved with 2 4s in your hand. Like, you don't have any blockers. You're completely stone cold in the dark. You're just closing your eyes and praying that I'm folding, which I don't think I've ever 5-bet folded in my life. Like, honestly, that's not the style that I played. I played, like, tight, like I opened a lot of pots, but, like, when I put the chips in, I had it. This was definitely, like, the loosest live hand I've ever played. And, but it's definitely the hand I'm famous for. Yeah,
I mean, you put in basically just under a third of your stack. 131K was your 5-bet. You had 420 to 425K. I think when because you started talking it through in your head before you called, because obviously she's all in, and you said yourself, I imagined you doing this and I was going to snap call you. Then you started overthinking it and talking out loud. And I think at one point, when you do call, Joe Stapleton agrees with something you say, because what you said is, well, if you're going to do it with this, ace-4, ace-5 is going to be exactly the same sort of thing.
But better because they have a blocker. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Like she could just slam 4s into kings or aces there. She has no idea. She has no other information except for my sizing and my body language. So yeah, she's completely in the dark there. Sorry about that.
No, that's all good. All good. Yeah, I mean, you said there was a massive fallout from that, but you know, that hand is, I wouldn't say it's what you're famous for, but it's a very famous hand that you're involved in. Now that then takes us on to 2015. when you won your first ever bracelet, June, World Series of Poker, $490,000. Now, in regards to this, you were free-handed, and there's a little notable hand that one of the gentlemen's had. You want to talk us through this?
Yeah, so well, it was an interesting tournament anyway. So it was during the week of Electric Daisy Carnival in Vegas. So I had a lot of friends in town for the parties, for the pool parties, and for the music festival and everything. And I was living at Jeff Madsen's house at the time. So we decided we'd throw a big party that night of the Turbo tournament. It was like the first ever Turbo bracelet event that they ever ran. We figured this is a good night to run the party because we'll probably be out of the tournament or, really deep in it. So it's like a win-win. So I invited a bunch of friends to the party. I told them, I'll be there around 10. And I was riding the short stack close to the bubble. And Ankush Mandavia was at my table and started drinking a beer. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to let you drink alone. So I started ordering some beers, kind of to pre-funk for the party, honestly, because I wasn't expecting to go very deep. And then I just started winning every hand, and then by the end of the night, I was like 8 beers deep and and had all the chips. And I didn't get to the party until probably like 3 a.m. or so. And when I got there, I still partied with everybody. And then, the party went all night.
Yeah.
And when I had to go back and play the next day, and we weren't in the Amazon, we were in the Amazon room. We weren't on any of the TV stages. We were just like in the middle of the room. So there was no live stream. There was no, it was just pretty wild. And there was a huge crowd of people all around us. And when we got free-handed, this hand came up where the chip leader, who is this nice French-Canadian guy, we were three-handed. It was me, him, and Igor Yargashevsky, the Ukrainian pro. And he opened the button. And there's been a lot of chatter between the rails at this point. Like, it was a pretty wild atmosphere. But he opened the button, and he'd been opening a lot. And Igor Yargashevsky reshoved. And we're three-handed, and I look down, I have ace-10 of clubs in the big blind. And, it might be kind of ICM suicide to call off here, but I just kind of felt like Igor would be shoving a lot of hands that I dominate here. Like, probably any ace, and like ace-10 suited is like pretty tough one to fold in my spot. I think the ICM calculations would probably say this is a fold, but like, I just wanted to win the tournament. I thought it was ahead, it just goes as simple as that. So I reshoved. So now this guy who raised the button is facing 2 all-ins. And he starts to kind of like lift his cards up, and he's like, oh, this is so sick. And he turns to his friend and he goes, this is the same hand you had in Borgata. And I'm like, dude, you can't be talking to the rail about the contents of your hand. That is absolutely out of line. And I was just like immediately on it. And like, he ended up just folding it and folded queens face up. And Igor Yargashevsky had ace jack. I had ace-10 suited. The flop came 10-4-3. So I'm ahead, turned jack, dagger in my heart, and then it ran out clean, So he doubled up. I was left with a very short stack. And the guy, all he had to do was say call with queens, and he would have won the bracelet,
Yeah.
So it's pretty gutting for him. Obviously, I don't want to give him a hard time about it. But we switched tables right after that hand. So we actually went over to one of the like TV stages, like stadium areas. And I just doubled up. Like, one of the first hands we got back, kings to the guy's ace-king suited, and then just kept winning a lot of pots, and then busted him, and then eventually got heads up against Igor Yargashevsky. And I mean, he's a super tough opponent, like tons of respect. And at this point, the whole party from the night before had started to show up and be super freaking rowdy because they're all just like drunk from the night before. And they're getting into it with the Ukrainian guys, and like me and Igor were cool. We have a lot of respect for each other, so we were just trying to like make sure that our rails didn't like kill each other while we were playing heads up. But I got it in the end. I think it was ace-4 offsuit against king queen. Like, he raised and I just shipped, and he just like snap call, and I'm like, oh, I'm dead, man. Like, he snap called, and all I got is like ace high. He had king queen, And when they're dealing out the cards, I kind of turned my back to the table, and I said a little prayer to my grandfathers. Both my grandfathers, like I said, were excellent card players, and I felt them there with me there in that moment, And it ran out clean, and I won the bracelet. So that was a pretty gratifying moment. Obviously, it's the dream of every poker player when you first get into poker is to win a World Series poker bracelet. It's the crowning achievement. I would argue that at that point in time, European Poker Tour title is much more valuable, but certainly it was a crowning achievement to have. It felt pretty surreal to have that gold bracelet in my hand and around my wrist. And boy, we continued that party for a couple more days, I'll tell you that much.
I can imagine.
I had a very rowdy rail, and it was super fun. I mean, my winner's photo is like 20 hammered, drunk, sleep-deprived party animals from, it was just wild. So it was a pretty surreal experience. And it was really fun to have all my friends there watching me. So that was, as opposed to Berlin in 2010, when the robbery happened, everybody went home, you know, like I didn't have a rail for that time. So it felt pretty cool having like all my friends there supporting me, which is really fun. I just wish my dad could have been there, because my dad comes down every summer for the World Series and plays and rails and makes friends with all my friends and comes and hangs out with us on smoke breaks, you know. And like my dad's just like the best, and he's been super supportive of my career. I wish I could have won it with him there, but I know they're very happy for me. So it worked
beautiful.
out.